that we have created a multi-page site, we've learned how to write HTML, we've learned how to style that HTML with CSS, and we've learned how to use Git and GitHub to both track the versions of our website and make it available as a website on the internet. Let's look at adding a little bit of functionality to our site with a tool called jQuery. Now, jQuery is a JavaScript library that allows us to add some functionality in terms of animation, interactivity, etc., with pretty low overhead in terms of what you need to learn. jQuery first came out in 2006, and at that time there was a wide disparity in the way that different browsers supported JavaScript and the different features of JavaScript that each browser supported. And jQuery was designed to kind of smooth that over for people and make it so you could write the exact same code that you needed to and it would work in any browser. That's not really a concern anymore. Largely, each browser supports JavaScript in pretty much the exact same way. But jQuery is still very pervasive on the internet. There are tons and tons and tons of existing websites that still use jQuery. And while you may not work on a new project at your job and start off using jQuery on a greenfield project, if you end up working at a place that has an older code base or an existing website, there's an incredibly good chance that you will use jQuery. And for our purposes, jQuery allows us to add some basic interactivity to our site without having to learn too much about how JavaScript works under the hood. So let's get started. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to include jQuery in our project, just like we do with CSS. So to do that, we're going to go to the download page for jQuery. And you can choose to download this and serve it yourself. But what is actually easier is to use what is called a CDN and link to a hosted version of jQuery. So I'm going to just search for jQuery CDN. And then I get directed to this code.jquery.com. And we're going to pick the version that we want to support. So we're going to go for jQuery 3.x. We're going to click on minified. And then we're just going to copy this script tag to our clipboard. And then we'll come back to our project in VS Code and we'll paste it in. So what we need to do is we need to paste this into every single site that we have. Or every page that we have in our site. So I'm going to paste jQuery in under every reference to our CSS file. And then I'm going to save it. And now that we've included jQuery, we can start writing some jQuery. So before we do that, let's go back over to CodePen and let's kind of look at some things that jQuery can do for us. So I'm just going to create a new pen here. And in my HTML, I'm going to create a nav with an unordered list with a bunch of list items with A tags in there. And then let's just say we'll have 4 of them. Okay. And we don't really care what these do, so we'll just give them the hash. And then we'll just give some text here. And then I'm going to put a button over top of the nav. So you can imagine that this is like it's like a hamburger menu on a mobile nav or something like that. And then I'm going to come down here in my CSS. I'm going to say nav display none. Okay, and then we're not going to see the nav anymore. So we'll save that. We'll come into our settings. We'll click on the JS tab, and we're going to search for jQuery. So we're going to add that, and we'll save and close. So now we have jQuery as part of this pen. So the way that jQuery works is it uses a very specific syntax to select elements in your HTML and listen for what are called browser events, and then respond to those browser events by doing really whatever you tell it. So the syntax for that, I'm going to open up my HTML here. So we want to focus on the button. In order to select this button, I'm going to type a $sign, which is shorthand for jQuery, and then I'm going to have some parentheses, and the parentheses are going to contain the selector that we want to look at. So in quotes, I'm going to provide my selector here, which is button, which is just like you would use for CSS. And just to prove that real quick, in button, I'm going to say padding 16 pixels or something like that. We'll see our button get bigger, and then let's get rid of the background. None. Okay. So now we've got this button. So I'm using the exact same selector here in my jQuery. I could do the same with classes. So if I said class equals nav trigger, and I wanted to use that in my CSS, you see that the style remains the same. And if I come down here in my jQuery selector and I use a class selector, that's going to grab onto the same element. So this isn't really about HTML or CSS, so I'm going to minimize those. And now that I have this selected using the $sign for jQuery, open and close parentheses, and a CSS selector in quotation marks inside the parentheses, we're going to do something with this. So what you need to do now is you need to add what is called the on function. So we're going to say period on, open and close parentheses, and at this point we need to say what it is specifically that we are listening for that we want to respond to. Now, browsers have what are called events, and events are things that happen within the browser. Clicking on things, mousing over things, submitting a form, et cetera, et cetera. So all of the kind of interactivity that you do within a browser, the browser recognizes as what is called an event. So the specific thing that we want to listen for is the click event. So in quotations, I'm going to say click, and then outside of the quotations, I'm going to put a comma, and then I want to say, what do I want to have happen when I click on this button? So we've selected the nav trigger with the class of nav trigger. We typed .on and to signify that we're going to listen for a browser event, and we're saying that we want to listen for the click event. But now we need to know what we want the browser to do with that click event. And we're going to type a special word. The special word is reserved for JavaScript, and it's function. Function is a behavior. It's something that you want to have happen. And once you type that function after the comma, you're going to need an open and close parentheses. And then outside of that open and close parentheses, you're going to want open and close brackets. And in here is what we want to have happen. So we'll type a little comment here just to keep track. This is what's going to happen after the click. Okay? So what specifically we want to have happen is we want this nav to show up. And we have a couple different ways to do that. So we could select the nav, same way that we selected that button. So we're going to find the nav, and we can use an element selector. Since we don't have a class on it, we could add a class if we wanted to. But for the sake of simplicity, let's just select the nav using an element selector. So I've got my $sign, open and close parens, quotes, and I'm going to say nav. Now, I'm going to add a period after that paren, and I'm just going to say .show. Open and close paren, which basically makes it so this behavior functions. And now, when I click on this, there's my nav. Great. But it doesn't go away, and that's, kind of defeats the purpose of a hidden menu. And plus, like the whole just showing up out of nowhere thing is a little boring. So let's add a little bit of animation to it. jQuery has a number of built-in methods, show being one of them, but it also has some animations built in. So let's change show to slide down, down being capitalized. Save that. And now when we click on this, you'll notice there's a little animation. It slides down. And that's great, but it still doesn't go anywhere when we click it to close it. So there is also slide up, which in our case doesn't matter because it's already gone. But there is the slide toggle method. And the slide toggle method will just do the inverse of whatever state the element that you have selected is currently in. So we click it, it slides down. We click that button again, it slides up. Slide down, slide up. And that, with what is effectively 3 lines of code, gives us a nice animated mobile menu. So that's cool. But aside from setting things up like this, there's a universe of jQuery plugins that facilitate all kinds of different behaviors without you really needing to learn how to write JavaScript.
Of jQuery included in our site, let's explore the concept of jQuery plugins. So if I come over to the browser and I look up Firefox, or I look up a jQuery plugin called Lightbox, I'm going to find this specific one, which I will link in the notes for this video. This is the original. It's by a guy named Lokesh Dakar. It's been going on for 8 years. It's pretty classic in terms of what you expect when you have a lightbox, get this kind of action. So let's look at how to set this up. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to the GitHub repository. So we'll click this link, and then we're going to download the code. So we'll click the green button that says code, and we'll download the zip. Next, we'll find that zip in our downloads folder, which is going to be in a folder called Lightbox2 dev. And then when you open that up, you're going to have a couple of different things in here. You're going to have some scripts, and you're going to have a CSS file, etc. So what you want to do is you want to, in your project, create a folder called JS. JS stands for JavaScript. And you're going to want to drag or add the lightbox.min.js file to the JS folder. Then in your CSS folder, you're going to want to add the lightbox.min.css file into your CSS folder. Next, we're going to look at how to use this. So now that we have that in our project, we put the CSS file in our CSS folder, and we put the lightbox.min.js file in a JS folder. We're going to go to Get Started. And we've already gotten the download of the zip taken care of. So let's look at getting this set up. So what we want to do is include that CSS in our page. So let's do that now. And we're going to do that by putting a link tag up top here, and then we're going to link to that file within our CSS folder. And I'll just replicate the process here. So I'm going to type link and tab, and that's going to focus my cursor in the quotes of the href attribute. Next, I'm going to hit // to go into the same level as my current file, so the same level of the project as my index.html file. I'm going to pick the CSS folder. I'm going to pick that lightbox.min.css folder, and now I've got that included. So I've already got a copy of jQuery linked here. It's coming from a CDN, so I don't actually have this in my project. Now I need to make sure that I put the script for Lightbox in here. And the way that we do that is right above the closing body tag. I'm going to type script, and then I'll say dot period slash, and that, period slash, again, because we're at the same level in the project as the index.html file. Let's go back to that folder, that file rather. Okay, and then we're going to say JS, lightbox.min.js. And then up here, I have a series of images that I just plugged in from something I had on CodePen. But what's crucial here is that each of these images is wrapped in an A tag. And the A tag has an href that is exactly the same as the src attribute of the image tag. And then what makes Lightbox work is this data Lightbox attribute. And the data Lightbox attribute is what tells Lightbox, okay, we want that cool Lightbox effect here. And quick aside, you'll see I've got green in my left-hand column here. This is Git telling me that I have new additions to my file since my last commit. So on that data Lightbox attribute, if you give each image or each A tag the same value, then you're going to have a Lightbox slideshow. So let's look at that. So here, actually, let's restrict the size of this gallery. So in my CSS, I've got gallery set up, a little bit of grid here for tablet size, and a little bit of grid for desktop size, and then we'll just do our width 95%, max width 1080 pixels, margin 0 auto. Okay, come back over here, refresh, and then a little bit more reasonable. So I've got these first 4 images set up as a lightbox, and now if I click on those, having included the lightbox script and the lightbox CSS file, I now get this nice shadow box effect. And you can't quite tell because they're all the same image, but I can keyboard through each of these. You can kind of see down here, image 404, image 204. So this is a really nice, pretty straightforward way to get a cool interactive effect going on your site. So again, that's including jQuery in your site, downloading the Lightbox CSS and the Lightbox JavaScript from the Lightbox repository on GitHub. And now that we have these in here, let's go ahead and push this up to GitHub and commit the change. So I'm going to say git. So I'm going to come back over to my source control tab right here. In the changes toggle, I'm going to click stage all changes. Now all those changes are staged. You notice the green line has gone away. Now I'm going to commit this. I'm going to say add lightbox, command enter to commit those changes. And now on this 3 dot menu, I'm going to click push. That's going to push up to GitHub. And now I'm going to open up GitHub. Go to my repositories, find that repository just to show the change, class test2. And here we go. We see this new commit, add lightbox. If I click on this, it's going to show me what has changed with that commit. I've added these CSS files for the gallery. I've added these images. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in the browser. So we go to settings, just to find the URL because I didn't have it open. And then here's the link to my GitHub page. And now you can see, oh, looks like I'm missing a little bit of something here. There we go, just hard refresh, update the cache. Now if I click on this, I've got that nice lightbox. All right, that is including jQuery and jQuery plugins with your site.